Namaskar. As our country celebrates Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav and the World Heritage Week, we from All India Radio bring to you how monuments and sites and museums are connected with this Azadi. Museums are located in monuments. For example, we have this famous Red Fort Museum, we have the Lucknow Residency, which is a tribute to the Sepoys who attacked Lucknow Residency in 1857, and we have other museums in monuments. Monuments celebrate freedom. Many a freedom fighter took refuge in monuments, they fought from monuments, they defended monuments, and they also attacked monuments to get the enemy. Now, museums again have a lot of artifacts related to our freedom struggle. They have the cannons, they have the armaments, they have the defense and offensive arms and armaments, and archives have contemporary pictures and texts, farmans, court proceedings, which tell us in literary form what exactly was the Indian voice. The freedom struggle has been very vast both in time and space. To say in one single word, right from north to the south, west to the east, India fought for its freedom. And as we complete 75 years, this is what we bring to you during the World Heritage Week. My first question, let me first explain whom I have on board today. We have professors of teaching history, teaching heritage, teaching conservation science, and also teaching art and architecture. So the concern along with students of heritage. So my first question to P. Aruna, Dr. P. Aruna, who teaches history and heritage at the Osmania University College for Women in Hyderabad is, Aruna, what made you introduce the subject of heritage in the college curriculum?
Thank you, Dr. Kedareshwari. We have introduced this subject on heritage in our college because our college itself is housed in a historic site and historic monument, the British Residency. So we thought that it would be very useful for the students if we can sensitize on them about the importance of heritage monuments, and we can also take the students for a field trip within the campus and bring some awareness among the students about the heritage and how we can conserve our own heritage. So that made us introduce this subject on history and also heritage.
Can you tell us, the residency is associated with a particular freedom fighter. Can you tell our listeners something about the freedom fighter?
Yeah, sure. We have in 1857, when the revolt has broken in the North India, even in South India also, especially in the Deccan, we had its repercussions. First of all, Turebas Khan is associated with this monument, that is the attack on the British Residency. This happened in the year 1857 on July 17th, when Turebas Khan, along with Maulvi Alauddin, who led the Rohillas, they came to the Deccan, and Turebas Khan himself was actually from Hyderabad. He belongs to Begum Bazar area, and they wanted to release Chida Khan, who was a Jamedar and who was also belongs to the Aurangabad regiment, and he was imprisoned in British Residency. So in order to release him from British Residency, they have planned, and they made they called for a meeting, and they wanted to release him from this British Residency. So on 17th July, they made all their plans, and this was actually Salarjung. He came to know about this plan, and he actually informed the British resident, who was Cuthbert Davidson, Colonel Cuthbert Davidson, and who was residing in the British Residency at that time. And he informed him about the plan. So Cuthbert made all the preparations, and on 17th July, Cuthbert was ready with all his equipment and all the people, and Turebaz Khan and Maulvi Alauddin, and along with 5,000 Rohillas, they attacked the monument, the British residency. And this happened at the time at 6 o'clock. It started at 6 o'clock, and on both sides there was very heavy firing, and this firing went on till early morning 4:30 a.m. And finally, because the British had a superior armaments and armory, so they could had an upper arm in this struggle. And finally, Turebaz Khan and Maulvi Alauddin, they fled from the site, and then Turebaz Khan was caught and brought back, and he was hanged in front of the British residency only. And today we can find his memorial also there. Whereas Maulvi Alauddin, he was captured and he was sent to Andaman jail.
I see. So that's very interesting that the 1857, usually termed by Western historians as a rebellion or a revolt or a mutiny, and the Indian voice was never heard. It is only captured in literary texts. We call it the first war of national independence that reached Hyderabad too. A very interesting fact you have brought to light. Dr. Aruna, another question is, I recall Golconda Fort also played a very important role in our freedom struggle. Can you tell us a few facts about that too?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, Golconda Fort is another important monument where we can hear about how it is associated with the freedom movement. We have Nizam Sikandar Jah's son, Mubarak-ud-Dawla, who actually was very much influenced by the Wahhabi movement, which was very popular in North India, and he had taken over the leadership in the Deccan, and along with Rasul Khan, who was a Nawab of Kurnool, he led this movement in the Deccan. Whereas the East India Company at this time, they suspected his actions, and they informed the Nizam and about his actions, and then he was asked, they asked the Nizam to arrest him. So the Nizam, without even considering that it was his own son, he arrested him and imprisoned him. But later, he was arrested in 1815 and was released, and in 1820 he was released, and again in 1835 he was arrested, and here he was imprisoned in Golconda Fort. So the English East India Company actually, they were the ones who suspected, and they made him arrested, and he was imprisoned there. And he spent the rest of his life, that is nearly 19 years, in Golconda Fort as a prisoner, where he died in 1854. So in this way, Golconda Fort is also connected with the
freedom struggle, war of independence. Yes. I think, Dr. Aruna, you may consider next time when you give, small assignments to your heritage students to ask them to connect freedom movement with monuments and come up with presentations, which will be very interesting from the research point of view, and children can be sensitized and told how important and relevant these monuments are, apart from architecture, art, historically how important they are to us. So with this, now from Hyderabad, may I take you to Ahmedabad to Professor Jigna Desai? Namaskar, Professor Jigna Desai. Glad to have you on AIR. As we celebrate the World Heritage Week and Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, we thought we should have your thoughts on this subject. Before that, may I introduce Dr. Jigna Desai. Jigna Desai is an associate professor and program chair for Masters in Conservation and Regeneration at Faculty of Architecture, CEPT University, Gujarat. She heads the Center for Heritage Conservation, CEPT Research and Development Foundation. She is an advocate of community-based heritage conservation and has worked on many projects in collaboration with community-based organizations and international partners. She has authored various books on the subjects. Welcome, Professor Jigna Desai. Professor Jigna Desai, my first question to you. We all know that urban spatial settlements are dictated by the needs of the contemporary times and uses. How would one justify the protection of historical buildings in the face of this need and challenge?
So I think I would respond to this by bringing in the importance of historic sites or heritage places in the contemporary environment. That their existence gives us a sense of place. It gives us a sense of history. It gives us a sense of belonging. And if we keep on erasing what is there in or what has been in the past in order to continue to create contemporary environments, then a city will become, or any city becomes monotonous and without a sense of place. So if you look at the best of the cities in the world that we all like to look at, we like to live in, we like to appreciate, are the cities that have respected their historic sites, and with that respect they have cultivated change, they have cultivated modernity. So I think it's from that point of view that I feel that there is a justification of conserving historic buildings, heritage sites. That's the way you tell the story of the city, and that's the way you find your sense of place in it.
Yes, I do agree. But you must have noticed that in most of the states, the Urban Development Authority and the Revenue Department, their concerted actions, their concerted policies are required to protect our monuments.
Yeah.
However, these lands, sometimes open sites, archaeological heritage sites with evidence, they are not alienated in favor of the department. As a result of which the revenue officers who are unaware of the Heritage Act's legislations treat it as government land as per record, and they resort to alienating it for development of housing facility for government employees or some other use. How do you face such situations? How do you address such problems?
So I think once again I find that it is a little dangerous to alienate historic site for the purposes of conservation when it is inside the bustling historic city, and at the same time it is not all right to kind of chart it out for development without considering the archaeological value of it. So for example, the ASI Archaeological Survey of India has this kind of a protected zone around the archaeological sites as per the ANSR law, and they also have a regulated area which is around 300 meters.
Yes.
Protected areas.
Yes.
Now, as per the law, these sites should be isolated. As per the law, these sites should be looked after from an archaeological point of view, and when it is possible, they should be. But, for example, in the city of Ahmedabad or many cities of India, 300 meters is a very dense neighborhood, and those neighborhoods need their own kind of, they need their own upgradation in terms of infrastructure to have their quality of life. They have their own livelihoods that are linked to these sites. So in such situation, it is more important to to think about a sensitive development rather than alienating them, because alienating them also means that those sites will never have a living presence in a city. Those monuments will never have a living presence in the city. So I would like to bring into your notice a tool that we have now in National Monument Authority, which is called the impact assessment. And
Yes.
for many infrastructure sites, the National Monument Authority, the infrastructure sites require to do heritage impact assessment.
Okay.
If that infrastructure is very close to an archaeological site.
Yes.
So I think that's a very important tool to be used in order to bring that balance of respecting the archaeology, respecting the historic monument or a historic site, but at the same time making sure that the area around it is also lived in. Because many of these monuments have values because they're because they're lived in.
Right. Very right. Now, Professor, today, as our country celebrates Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and we are also celebrating the World Heritage Week, declared by UNESCO, of course, initiated by ASI. So, could you inform our listeners about some historical monuments or places which can be celebrated as part of our freedom struggle, apart from the Sabarmati Ashram? Sabarmati, of course, has universal value. It has, focus. People all over the world are focused on it. Can you inform us about some more monuments in Gujarat?
So, actually, I'll give you an example of the historic city of Ahmedabad, because I've studied that in great detail. The Bhadra Maidan, which just now when you look at on the face of it, there is no monument there which will tell us that this is an important site for the freedom movement.
Yeah.
But if you look at the history of many other cities, I mean, I think Ahmedabad is just an example of it. But there are many cities who would have that. But on the Bhadra Maidan, there are these stories of processions and public meetings that happened. There was this old Premabai Hall, which was the place where meetings with Sardar Patel and Gandhiji.
Excellent. Yes.
Along with the people. So the Bhadra Maidan has many such stories of even the labor movement and the processions that were taken out by women in support of labor movement. They all have embedded history in the Bhadra Maidan. So I think there are many such sites which may not have a monument defined as a freedom struggle monument.
I understand.
But there are places that will have a lot
But
of
they have been happening places for many socio-political historical movements.
Yes.
And that's quite impressive too. Of course, Sabarmati Ashram is the place all people, usually go to. And
it's a nucleus in Ahmedabad.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Professor, for giving us your time. I'm sure our listeners would be enjoying this, all the information you have shared with us. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much for your.
Yeah, namaskar.
Thank you, namaskar.
Now, from Ahmedabad, let us travel to Delhi to meet and talk to Dr. Vandana Sinha. Welcome to All India Radio, Vandana Sinha. Dr. Vandana Sinha is the director of Center for Art and Architecture, American Institute for Indian Studies, Delhi. Now, Dr. Vandana has authored various books on this subject. She has organized various national and international seminars, symposiums, and summits on art, architecture, and museums. Today we have her with us. And Dr. Vandana, as our country celebrates Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and we also are celebrating the World Heritage Week from 19th of November to 25th of November, we thought it is very apt to have you with us. My question to you, Dr. Vandana, is we often consider water, we know that water is the elixir of life. And since ages, we have archaeological evidence of how water was sourced and stored in different ways since the Harappan times, like Dholavira, which was recently tagged with the World Heritage inscription by UNESCO. Can you tell our listeners about the history of some significant wells of India and their role in the socio-economic life of our country?
Thank you, Dr. Kedareshwari. Thanks for inviting me today for this talk. Well, I'll be very happy to talk about the stepwells of the country. So, in ancient India, actually the entire water management system was based on rivers, reservoirs, wells, and stepwells. The largest stepwells among them have been found in Western India, in the states of Gujarat and Rajasthan, because those two were the dry regions and the water table used to be low. Stepwells are therefore the most appropriate solution to get water and at the same time allow one to find some privacy and cool spaces to relax, drink, and wash. We should give credit to our ancestors for this ingenious idea of optimizing the space created by digging large wells with staircases. They built multi-level, multi-purpose spaces around the wells, and that's how these utility-driven water structures came into being. Stepwells are, in fact, considered sacred as those were associated with water, one of the 5 primal elements of life, including earth, sky, air, and fire. In Hindu culture, in addition to its importance in religious and spiritual purification, water is considered the primary means of the release of the dead. It is believed that by assimilation of ashes of the dead to the river, they get liberation from the cycle of birth and death. So, a charitable construction of charitable edifices was considered a meritorious act in the ancient India. We have there are several instances in which we hear that certain king or queen donated stepwells to the people of their countries. So, for instance, Queen Lahini, widow of King Vigrah Raj, prepared a stepwell and tank in 1042 CE in the village of Basantgarh in Sirohi district of Rajasthan. She recorded in her donation on a stone inscription, which clearly states that the queen's hope that the steps that she built would act like a staircase leading her departed husband up to heaven. Another 11th century Bauli or stepwell in Nadol was built by another queen in Rajasthan. So, and in around 1500, the famous Adlaj Vav was built by the Queen Ruda Devi to commemorate the memory of her husband, King Veer Singha. The donor's inscription compares the water of the well with the heavenly river Ganga. But the largest among all the stepwells, which is also World Heritage Site, was built in 1065. The Queen Udyamati built it in the memory of her husband, King Bhimdev, and it's known as Ranki Vav or the Queen's Stepwell. It was built in the Solanki capital of Anhilpur, Patan. I think most of us should be familiar with this monument as it is also seen on our ₹100 note. Ranki Vav is a really very big stepwell. It's 69 meters from its entrance in the east to the deep well at the far end in the west. The stepwell was believed to have been built as an inverted temple. The Garbhagriha on the Sanctum Sanctorum of which could have been the well. Given the positioning and depiction of the themes related to the god Vishnu as the savior of the universe and symbolism of the heavenly river Ganga. The well enshrines 3 images of God Vishnu sleeping on the cosmic serpent Shesh at 3 different levels of the well. These sculptures are discreetly placed in the center of the back wall of the well, visible from each story of the structure. So the placement was such that if the water level rose in the well, the sculptures would still be visible to the worshippers from the upper levels of the staircase. Another interesting representation which catches our attention is the row of 8 vasus which occur at the deepest level of the well, at the edge of the water, where they are portrayed holding their hands to the water below, which symbolizes the liberating heavenly river Ganga. The vasus were heavenly personages who had been cursed to lose their status and be born on earth for stealing the sacred cow of a heavenly sage. They could only be liberated by the sacred river Ganga. So according to the epic of Mahabharata, they were born to Ganga and 7 of them got their salvation because of Ganga, but the 8th Vasu could not, and who lived as Bhishma. So the depiction of Vasus at the bottom of the well reminds us that Ranki Vav stepwell was Udyamati's memorial to her deceased husband Bhimdev for his release to heaven.
Excellent, Dr. Vandana Sinha. We really enjoyed, I'm sure the listeners would have enjoyed this. This reminds me of, how queens and wives of rulers, local rulers also donated these stepwells for the public. There's a Masab tank in Hyderabad, and that was built by Ma Sahiba, one of the rulers, Qutub Shahi rulers, who was the daughter of one ruler wife of another, and the mother of the third. And so when her son went missing, the elephant carried him away, and she vowed that she would get a tank constructed for the benefit of the public if her son returned back safely, and she did that.
Wow.
So now that's called Ma Saiba tank. It is gradually it became Masab tank. So thank you so much, Dr. Vandana Sinha. We really did enjoy what you shared with us. Thank you again.
Thanks very much.
Now we are done with Ahmedabad and Delhi. We move back to Hyderabad, and I have with me a young assistant professor who has just been recruited last month, and she's Bhargavi. She's from the Jawaharlal Nehru University for Arts and Architecture. She's with us today in the studios of AIR. And Bhargavi, may I ask you, you were telling me that during your PG, when you were doing your post-graduation in conservation architecture, you visited Badami. That would have probably been your first visit to a historical monument from the subject point of view.
Yes, ma'am.
So how did it make a difference to your thinking about your subject, about conservation, and about the monument?
Yes, ma'am. As you said previously, it was my first visit to the place of Badami as a part of the academic exercise. It was basically for us to learn about the documentation techniques in the field of the conservation. And when we see the Badami, it is a UNESCO site. Along with the Badami, there are few more sites which are constructed by the early Chalukyas during 6th to 8th centuries. So we have visited all the 4 sites, namely Badami, Pattadakal, Ayol and Mahakuta, and we have taken few monuments in which we have documented each and every structure using different kind of documentation techniques. The most common method what we used was the combination method, which is the hand survey and the photogrammetry technique as well as the ladder survey. So these were the which we have learnt at the time, and as a part of the profession we are using it right now as well. And even when I teach my students about the documentation, I'm really connected to this place, especially whenever I take classes about the documentation. I take this particular place as an example, and I teach them different techniques as well through my experience belong to that place.
That's good, Bhargavi. But a very important aspect is you have touched upon documentation of monuments. Mm-hmm. This is so important because this documentation helps us to understand how to restore it in future.
Yes.
Have there been any kind of interventions in form of conservation or restoration in the monument?
Yes,
so do you record these also? Did you get an occasion to record this also? Suppose you see a change in the monument. Could you record that in Badami?
Yes, ma'am. In the whole process of documentation, what we do was our initial step would be the literature study. Through the literature, we get to know how exactly it is in the past, and through the documentation, we get to know what exactly in the present. We combine these two, and we finally submit the report, in which we get to know about the past, present. So with the help of the past and present, if we want to do a conservation or the restoration in the future, this would be the main key aspect for it. And I can say that why we need the documentation means without knowing the past, we can't help in the preservation of the future. So that's the main.
That's very important. May I share with the listeners that when the 1,000 Pillar Temple, there was a public interest litigation filed in the Honorable High Court of Andhra Pradesh, then Andhra Pradesh. The question came up that, were there any pillars missing? The 1,000 Pillar Temple in Warangal, Telangana, is under the Archaeological Survey of India. And I had the occasion to argue for ASI. And I found that the book written by Henry Cousin was a great help to me because he had documented it so well, and he had some photographs published also, which helped me to prove that there were no pillars missing.
Okay.
So that won the day for Archaeological Survey of India. So documentation is an important step, a very important step along with conservation. But more important than documentation and conservation is first to promote the monument. Yes. You promote the monument by making people aware and by making it visitor friendly. And for example, if people come to a monument, they come to visit it, they come to make eye copies, they come to take photographs. I think we should be more friendly. The Archaeological Survey of India and the Department of Archaeology in the state government should become more friendly towards people who want to make eye copies, paintings and photographs. Allow them, so that way you also spread, through art, the message about monuments. So, Bhargavi, very glad to have your responses on the subject. Coming back to Aruna, I come back to Aruna again with us another question. Aruna, you have introduced the subject of heritage. Yeah, you did tell us that you introduced it because your college is located in a residency which is a historical monument.
Yes.
But how are the students taking it? I see you have 2 students with you here.
Yes.
How are the students taking the subject and what is the response?
Yes, we have introduced a subject called Understanding Heritage, which is a skill enhancement course. And students are very much interested because they are being taught like what is heritage, what is tangible heritage, what is intangible heritage. And we also give them some idea about what is an antiquity and how we need to protect our heritage and what are the various legislations that are there for preserving heritage and conservation of heritage. So they are very much keen to learn all these things, and because our college itself is on the historic site where we have British residency, and I'm taking them to the field trip. I'm explaining to them how we can protect the monument, and in case if anyone violates or if anyone scribbles some names on the monument and all, what actions should be taken, and all these things I'm explaining to them, and they are showing a keen interest. And not only history students, but we have also started a heritage club, and almost there are about 300 students from different streams like science stream and even mathematics, and BCom students also joined in this heritage club, and they all really love to go and see the monument. And I explained to them what is the importance of this monument, not only this monument, but any monument for that matter, how we have to protect these monuments.
Excellent. I think this is a very good step taken by the Osmania University for College for Women. I think this step perhaps is one of the first in Telangana.
Yes, ma'am.
Right?
Yes.
And
Heritage Club.
twin Telugu states also.
Yes.
So congratulations to you and your college
Thank you,
authorities for introducing this subject. And may I ask our young student who has joined us here, Sharini. Sharini, how do you find this subject?
Yeah, ma'am. Actually, I'm a history student, ma'am. Heritage is nothing but it's a part and form of the history. So, firstly, saying heritage is nothing but we inherit from the past, we value and enjoy in the present, and we promote it to the future generations.
Excellent.
So, this is the thing, ma'am. And mainly talking about the heritage, we have 3 forms, ma'am. Firstly, tangible, intangible, and the natural forms. We come across many monuments, artifacts, and the culture, lifestyle, traditions, and all, ma'am, which play an important role in this heritage, and seems a very interesting fact, ma'am. And especially for the young students, it's an opportunity to know about the local heritage and the local culture, and the ambience and everything. So, ma'am, in my view, heritage is very important because it helps in shaping our identity, and we also become part of that. It also connects one individual to the other individual.
It connects, and heritage tourism is a very important vertical of the tourism industry.
Yes, ma'am.
It creates employment apart from,
Even,
awareness. There is adventure tourism, there's many forms of tourism, but heritage is the main horse of tourism. Now, turning to Kiranmai. Kiranmai, you are interested in history and heritage. What prompted you to take this subject?
Ma'am, actually, from my childhood, I love history, ma'am, because where we can know what happens in the past, and we can even connect it to the present, ma'am. Whatever happens in the present, it is even related to the past, ma'am.
So you'll be a great ambassador for history. There are very few students taking history and heritage. I'm so glad you'll be one of the best ambassadors for us. Yes, you're very right. The past is always connected to the present, and the present is connected to the future. So when you, just like a car, when you drive a car, you need a front view glass, you need a rear view mirror, and you need the side mirrors, because when you want to drive straight, you need all three views. So history is a subject which gives you all three views to drive safely. And here when I say drive, you to move in life, in your career, in your life, in society very safely. Thank you, Sharani and Kiranmai, for being with us today. I really enjoyed your talk, but I do hope that you spread the word of protection of monuments and sites and heritage for posterity. How do we protect? By avoiding human vandalism, right?
Yes.
And by, you see what happens most because of superstition and because of stories, they cut off these necks of Nandis in search of gold. They saw off cannons to sell it for a few rupees. So this is human vandalism. You can notice the graffiti on our monuments. So we should not leave everything to the government or the government agencies. We should, as responsible citizens, do something for our own country, own heritage, own state, own society. Okay? So thank you so much. I enjoyed having all of you with me today. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.